Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
You found your person. Now let the Knot help you with everything else. The Knot connects you to the wedding inspo, vendors, venues, and planning tools you need to make your day totally you. Having helped plan 25 million weddings, we've got your back when it comes to every little detail like RSVPs, budgets, and more. Because your wedding comes to life with the connections that matter the most. Get started at theknot.com/audio. The Knot. Let's plan your wedding together.
This is Addiction Medicine Journal Club. I'm Dr. John Keenan.
And I'm Dr. Sonya Tredici.
We believe that addiction is a disease that can be treated, and we want to help you stay up to date with the latest research that you can use in your addiction medicine practice. This podcast offers Category 1 CME through MyCares in Michigan State. The link for the CME are in the show notes. This week, we're going to be discussing the definition of recovery. So, Sonya, tell me about your week in the office.
My week in the office has been amazing so far, and I have my 2 busiest days coming up. And in like 9 hours, I'll be giving grand rounds for our health system on novel uses of buprenorphine. I hope you'll be there, and perhaps I can repurpose some of the content for the podcast at a later date.
That's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I feel like you've been a staple at our grand rounds many times.
If there's ever a hole in the St. Max's grand round schedule, they call me, and I have a lot of content. So
yeah, I've done a couple too. It's normally fun.
Yeah, I like it. Why not, right? How about you? How's your office? What's the vibe at your office this week?
Flu. Lots of flu and vaccine hesitancy.
Yeah.
Lots of that. So kind of where we're at.
So much flu, RSV, coughing, sneezing, GI bugs. I'm like, please do video visits, everyone. Please. But they don't listen.
Yeah. No, it is what it is. So what's going on in addiction news for you this week?
So saw a super interesting article in Scientific American about sports betting. And I've been interested in this because I've had some patients who are struggling with gambling, and I've been trying to help them as much as I can. But this is about electronic sports betting that you have on your phone. So according to this article in Scientific American, sports betting, it really took off in 2018 when there were some changes in our laws making it legal, or allowing states to make it legal. And right now, I think 30 states in the U.S. allow sports betting. And John, 1 in 5 American adults have an account with some kind of sports betting app, like 20%. That is so many. So maybe you don't feel like answering this, but do you do online sports betting? You're a guy, right?
No.
I've
never, gambling's never done anything for me. I've never found it exciting. I think the most I'll do is do a $10 fantasy football, or just more so just to kind of have the camaraderie with friends over the football season. But no, I've never done any of the sports betting.
Yeah, no, I haven't either.
My brother does though. The girl one I talked about before. He loves his sports betting, and we'll be doing stuff, and I'm like, Sam's calm. I'm like, you got a problem if you're betting on UFC women's fighting. What if the 13th round is going to go to the bell? I'm like, this is not normal. The world championship of bowling. I'm like, I think the people just bet on everything.
Well, I think that was the really interesting thing about this article, is that the ease of electronic sports betting makes it that much more addictive. So, there's different addictive potential to different kinds of gambling, just like drugs that have a quicker onset and a higher high and then wear off more quickly are more addictive than drugs that are slow onset and last for a while. And gambling is the same way. So gambling that has a slower pace and the wins or the rewards are spread out over a longer period of time, that's less addictive than gambling that gives you an immediate reward. So an example is if you're betting on sports and the only bet you can place is whether your team wins, you got to wait for the whole thing to be over before you can find out, your bet. If it's baseball, it could be 4 hours. You only get to bet once in like 4 hours. You don't have this rapid cycle like you do with slot machines. It's the same with poker. You're playing poker with your friends at a table, you play all night, um, and you don't get that many wins. Whereas if you're playing the slots, you get a win or a loss every second, and that's what makes slot machines more addictive than like poker playing. So sports betting on an app gives you that really sort of immediate uh, win and this sort of um, quick, I don't know, surge of dopamine. You can bet on these little things like who scores the first point, whether someone will make a free throw or not. They're these little tiny bets. It's not just on the outcome of the game. And the scary thing in this article is that the apps track you very carefully and they know when you're most likely to bet. They know what you've bet on before. They send you push notifications of bets that would be appealing to you. And just like your drug dealer comes and finds you when you're trying to get into recovery and you haven't bought any drugs in a while, your drug dealer comes and offers you free drugs. The apps will send you credits for like free bets if you haven't bet in a while to try to, you know, reel you back in. And they make it very hard to know how much money you've lost. And they make it very easy for you to deposit more money, but hard to tell the total that you've lost. There's just a lot of ways in which they make massive money losing easy, and betting easy and addictive. And then it's not just a small problem. The Another article that was cited in this paper was that 4 years after a state legalizes online sports betting, average consumer credit score in the state overall goes down by 1%, and the likelihood of filing for bankruptcy increases 25 to 30% in that state once you legalize sports betting. So I was kind of shocked by the prevalence of it. And so, yeah, I don't know. Is that something some of your patients have come to you with, issues
Yeah,
about
I feel like I
gambling?
do get a fair amount of gambling since it's been legalized, and I don't know. It's tragic, right? I've had some people really jack their life up, like way more on a weekend of gambling than a weekend of heavy drinking. You know, humongous losses, gambling away kids. College savings plans. It's really sad, and it's hard because people often are resistant to treatment, and you can kind of do the gambling exclusionary registry, which is kind of a nice resource if anyone's unaware of, where states that have gambling, you can kind of have someone register for a period of time where they're not allowed to kind of go to a casino, and the casino can't take their money and they can't accumulate winnings. So that's kind of a great resource, but yeah, it's pretty tragic.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, that gambling self-exclusion program includes online gambling. So, you can ban yourself from online gambling. And you choose how long you want that ban to last when you sign up for it. And, 1 year, I think you can choose like 1 year, 5 year, and forever. And if you wanna undo it, I did it with a patient. I didn't help him undo it, I helped him do it. We did it together. And, to undo it, you have to, like, physically go visit the gaming control board office in Harrisburg in person to talk about it before they'll undo the, self-exclusion.
It is funny how they get you in. Like, this is way off topic, but in medical school, I lost my credit card, and our medical school is across the street from a casino, and the casino was giving out 10 free dollars to gamble every day. And so for like a month, while I was waiting for my credit card and my debit card to get shipped to me, I would go in the casino and get the free $10 and then immediately cash it out. And I lived off that for like a month.
Really sad.
You could stretch $10 pretty far.
That is really sad. They didn't, like, ban you from the casino?
I got some looks by the third, fourth week. I was kind of sweating them out going in there.
Oh my gosh. Well, how about you, John? Any addiction medicine news you wanna share with our audience?
Yeah, I read this really kind of interesting commentary. It's called "The Misguided Reason Why Providers Aren't Prescribing More Buprenorphine for Opioid Use Disorder." It's by Joella Adams. It's from January 2024. And it's interesting. We always kind of talk about this, like, what's it going to take to get more people in the game? And one problem before was the X waiver, like we talked about. It was a great thing at first, and then we thought it was a barrier. And they talked about, since kind of revoking that kind of X waiver in 2022, we've had like you can say, like, wow, we have a 400% rise in prescribers, but really we've gone from 2 to 8% of kind of eligible people actually prescribed. It's still a pretty low number for a pretty benign medication. Especially, a medication now that's kind of a core element of most primary care training programs. I'm not sure, we've talked about this before. I know family medicine now has it as a core curriculum, as part of an ACGME requirement. I think internal medicine as well.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Yeah. So it's like kind of a core skill. It's kind of interesting. It's like, if it'd be like only 8% of your docs coming out of residency are treating sinus infections, right? It's just doesn't really make sense. And they kind of still talk about this hesitancy people have about like everyone's concerned about kind of diversion of the buprenorphine they prescribe, despite kind of research showing that, diversion in communities, while we don't endorse it, that diverted communities have much lower overdose rates. Um, and that actually kind of like on average, they're saying that kind of they predict that kind of diverted buprenorphine probably averts on average 6% of overdoses that could occur. So it's kind of a 6% reduction. So I don't know. I just think it's interesting that, we still just have this ongoing debate about how to get kind of people to prescribe, how to get people to treat for something that is a very common problem that really kind of eats up a lot of healthcare resources. Like, whether you engage someone in treatment for their addiction, or you can kind of continue to see them as they have like issues with their disease in uncontrolled states, either kind of like, drug related medical complications, kind of uncontrolled cravings or withdrawal where they're seeking emergency medical services, or somatic symptoms that, they're using to try to acquire substances. I feel like kind of treatment engagement still is the best way, but we're just not making a dent. And, if removing the X waiver only took us from 2 to 8%, like how do you get the other 92% to kind of engage?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I just think I think it's just stigma. It's fear about being a pill mill and fear about the patients being disruptive and fear about pushback from your colleagues and your health system and your boss and your pharmacy, you know, and fear of working with people who are struggling instead of people who are doing well. That's what I think.
I think you do this too, but like I have a lot of residents come out, but even like the emergency department, I'm not an emergency doctor, medicine physician, but the toxicology rotating students now, I've had some come out to my office just for one day because they're like, their whole rotation is kind of overdoses and intoxications in the hospital. And they come out to the clinic once a day. And actually, like I get a lot of positive feedback like after the day where the students really enjoyed it because they see people recover, right? And I think that
Right.
that's not kind of what most people think of when they think of this group. And so it's kind of a very like uplifting group as to kind of where people can be and to not be disheartened.
Well, right. Like in my addiction clinics, the patients are the least of my problems. Like the patients are awesome and they're low key, they're easy to work with, they're by and large successful. It's a great patient population to work with. I do find though a lot of challenges with like right now it's pharmacies. I'm running into a lot of I don't know, just barriers at the pharmacy that are kind of based in stigma. I'll give you an example. You know, I almost lost it on Walmart yesterday. So the patient is looking for, she's trying to fill her script, and I think her normal pharmacy didn't have it. So she was trying to find a pharmacy that did have enough buprenorphine for her prescription. She calls a Walmart and they refuse to fill the script and they asked me to call them and they tell me they won't fill the prescription because it's a red flag that my office is so far from the Walmart. And I say, "My office is 15 miles from your Walmart." And they say, "No, it's not. The script says you're 75 miles away." And I say, "Well, I'm not. I don't know why it says that." And it turns out it was some computer glitch, like I had sent the script from an encounter that was a phone encounter, and the person who answered the phone was at an office that was 75 miles away because 'cause we're a big health system. But, like, they wouldn't do that with any other medicine. No one's ever challenged an oxycodone prescription because I'm too far away. I mean, I'm sending oxycodone all over the place. I mean, it makes me sound like I prescribe a lot of oxycodone. I don't, but I send it to
Yeah, what's going
multiple
on over there?
places. I know, you know, I sent one to, somewhere in Jersey today. Jersey's not calling me to complain that I'm too far away from their pharmacy, so I must be illegitimate. And I really do get a lot of that pushback.
Yeah, especially with the e-prescribing. I mean, it's easier for me to get into like my brokerage account on my investment retirement account than it is for me to send each of the controlled substances now. It's like multiple pings, secure devices. We just had to update, passwords to 15 characters in length with multiple different numbers and they change every 3 months. It's a lot, right? I mean, they're
Yeah.
pretty safe now. It's not like your paper script, like someone's walking in 300 miles away with a paper script that, you know, I don't know.
Yeah, I do feel like there's some barriers to prescribing buprenorphine. Even though it's medically it's easy and the patients are chill, the system is still has a lot of bias in it that makes that care complicated, no matter what people say.
I think the future's optimistic.
You're an optimist. You're always an
It is.
optimist.
It's a better. It's better than it was, right? I think I know you get. There's a lot of work to be made, but I feel like the relationship with the medical community and recovery compared to when I was a medical student, which I'm not that old, although I feel it every morning anymore. But you know, I feel like a big difference with how the relationship goes both ways. Like the group is not just interacting with just a methadone clinic as their only contact point of the medical system. It's good. It's going to get better. It's a long time to repair the relationship.
Yeah, it's getting better. It is getting better. I'll give you that. So, you ready to hear about this article?
Yeah, tell me about it.
So this is really fun. The title of this article is Understanding the Shared Meaning of Recovery from Substance Use Disorders, New Findings from the What is Recovery study, published in the Journal of Substance Abuse. It's a little bit old. It was published September 2023, so about a little more than a year ago. But I've been kicking it around for a while, and I was really happy to be able to present it. So, John, we had talked about this on a previous episode, but when you use the phrase in recovery, what do you mean? Is it like if you say the patient's in recovery, what are you talking about?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like when you actually make me say a definition of it, I don't really know. It feels like it's more like art. I kind of know it when you know it, but I
Right.
think it's more of an approach that someone's kind of like their life is no longer being controlled by a substance. When you look at the criteria for substance use disorder, are they no longer having medical complications? Are they no longer having kind of legal ramifications of their actions? Are they repairing broken relationships? Are they maintaining employment? I look at it as like a functional wellness definition personally.
Right. Yeah. Last week in the office, a patient who has opioid use disorder primarily asked me if it quote unquote counts as being in recovery if she still drinks alcohol. This person drinks, I don't know, I forget, once a month or something when they go out with friends. And I told her it's up to her to define what recovery means. I'm not the keeper of who's in recovery or not. It's my job to advise her on, the health ramifications of her behavior. And I don't think alcohol is a great, isn't good for her health, but it's it doesn't mean she can still be in recovery even if she's not abstinent from all drugs or alcohol. Um, but that conversation made me think about this article. So a little more background. Survival of a substance use disorder or recovery from a substance use disorder often requires really significant life changes, and making and maintaining these changes is often referred to as recovery. That process of making or having made those changes is your recovery. But it does mean very different things to different people, and people's experiences vary widely. We definitely have been moving away from a recovery equals abstinence concept for a while, but there's no new common definition. And we do need a definition because knowing your desired treatment outcome is foundational to guiding delivery of service. You need it to evaluate prevention and intervention programs, to study predictors of recovery in the community, to communicate with the public about what is recovery and what we should be striving for as a society. So it is good to have a definition. They have in this paper a little chart. They start out with a chart of how various major they call them stakeholder organizations define recovery. And it's kind of cool. So I'm going to read two of them just as examples. And the paper is open access. So anyone wants to see the full table of all the different definitions, you can click on the link in our show notes. The most recent definition that they published, which is from NIDA, says recovery is, quote, a process of change through which people improve their health and wellness, live self-directed lives, and strive to reach their full potential. So that's good. It's an awesome definition, actually. But if you're trying to evaluate whether or not your program, quote, help people live self-directed lives, what does that mean? It's open to significant interpretation. It's too non-specific to be of much use, actually. So really, it encompasses all positive life changes. It's a very broad definition. You know, there's a slightly wordier definition from ASAM, or the American Society of Addiction Medicine. So they kind of go to town trying to be more specific. But again, it still needs some work, I think. They say recovery is an active process of continual growth that addresses the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual disturbances inherent in addiction. Recovery must include 1, the aim of improved quality of life and enhanced wellness, as identified by the individual. 2, an individual's consistent pursuit of abstinence from the substance or behaviors toward which pathological pursuit had been previously directed or which could pose a risk for pathological pursuit in the future. Relief of an individual's symptoms, including substance cravings. 4, improvement of an individual's own behavior control. Keep going. 5, enrichment of an individual's relationships, social connectedness, interpersonal skills. And 6, improvement in an individual's emotional self-regulation. So they kind of tried to lay it all out. But again, even these are a little bit vague. Some are specific, but some are kind of vague. But both of these and most of the stakeholder definitions define recovery as a process, not a destination. You don't achieve recovery and then you're good. You're in the process of recovery. The work itself is being in recovery. So the authors of this study, the What is Recovery study, set out to determine how people in recovery themselves defined it, not how it was defined for them. What they did is they used a 35-item questionnaire which reflected 4 domains of recovery, and the participants reported whether or not each element definitely belonged in the definition of recovery, and then they ranked items according to how often they were scored. So it's a pretty simple study. Basically, again, 35 potential elements of recovery, and the people had to rank whether or not they belonged in their definition. The population included, it was pretty big, 9,341 people filled out this survey. They self-identified as being in recovery from alcohol or drug problem, or recovered from an alcohol or drug problem, or in medication-assisted recovery, or having had a prior problem with alcohol and drugs. So they really tried to sweep up lots of people who could be counted as in recovery. They were 54% female, mostly middle age, age 35 to 65. 36% were urban and 44% suburban. This is an American study. 92% were Americans. Also white and well educated, 88% white, 50% with a bachelor's degree or higher. And 84% were abstaining from alcohol and drugs. So abstinence is a big part of people's recovery in this study. And 87% reported that recovery should include abstinence, or at least some form of abstinence. About 72% had attended a treatment program to help with their recovery. And in terms of substance, 59% of people struggle with alcohol, 10% crack or cocaine, 7% heroin, 7% methamphetamine, and then a smattering of other things. So this is heavily weighted towards people with alcohol use disorder. And then the outcome they looked at, as I said, it was a questionnaire, 35 potential elements of recovery. And they asked if each element belonged in the definition of recovery definitely, somewhat, maybe for others, but not for me, and does not belong there at all. And just to give you guys a sense of the elements in the questionnaire, some examples, like the first domain is abstinence. So no use of drugs or alcohol. Does that belong in the definition of recovery? The next category was the essentials of recovery, things like being honest with myself, handling negative feelings without using drinking or drugs, getting along with family and friends better than I did before. Number 3 was enriched recovery. So having tools to try and feel inner peace when I need to, being the kind of person people can count on, and a bunch of other sort of higher level achievements. And finally, spirituality of recovery. So not only being connected to a religion, but things like being grateful or being connected to a spiritual being or force to help me deal with difficulties in life. So those are the 4 domains, and it was super long. I'm not going to read out the whole list, but again, it's an open access article that you can look at yourself if you want. And then the authors set thresholds for calling each factor a core factor or prevalent factor, and looked at a bunch of pre-specified subgroups. They called a factor um, core, meaning that 80% of people at least put it in their top 10. and it was in the top 10 for all 30 subgroups. And they called it prevalent if it was endorsed by 80% of people in their top 10 and was in the top 10 for 26 to 29 subgroups. So something could be a core factor of recovery, meaning every subgroup agreed on it, or a prevalent factor of recovery, meaning most subgroups agreed on it. And just for study design, this was online survey, confidential, anonymous, and they collected a little bit of sociodemographic data as well. So before we continue, John, what do you think of this study?
I think it's interesting. I mean, it seems pretty encompassing. I think the one thing that kind of really strikes out to me is kind of the mix of the substances, right? Very heavy alcohol use. And then kind of, I thought kind of relatively light on opioid use. I think kind of, I don't know if I would say that kind of reflects the recovery community as a whole, or I like to see the specifics of what that would look like compared to what we consider the recovery community.
Yeah, and I honestly don't know. That's a great question now that you say it. In the recovery community overall, what percent of people are in recovery from alcohol compared to other things? I don't know the answer to that. Um, so let's talk validity. I did think this was a valid trial. There are definitely some strengths. The first is large size. So even, for instance, even though only 7% of people had opioids as their drug of choice, with close to 10,000 people in this study, it still gave you a pretty good size subgroup for the opioids. The survey questions were developed using data from previous studies about recovery, so these were already factors that other patients had mentioned as being important. They had very broad recruitment from not just online communities, but recovery organizations, and then community venues where people might not actually be in a recovery program, because that's a weakness of some of the other studies of recovery. They exclude people who are kind of DIYing it, who don't have a program that they're working with. Those people sort of in independent recovery are a subgroup often neglected in other studies. And I thought funding was unlikely to cause bias. It was funded by the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. So there were some weaknesses, though. Of course, it's an online survey. It will miss subgroups that are not online, and it was done in 2012 originally. So at that point, we weren't quite as online as we are today. So the generalizability is not known. This anonymous data is not validated. We don't know for sure what's really the truth. Um, the thresholds they set for core elements of recovery were kind of arbitrary. They said if greater than 80% of people put it in their top 10. They called it core. The other thing that I think limits the validity a little bit is that perceptions of a meaningful recovery will change over time based on culture, resources, based on the drug supply, how difficult recovery is to achieve. So if you have a time or a group where there's a huge housing crunch and suddenly people are experiencing homelessness, people might put housing as a key element of recovery. Whereas if housing's not an issue, people might not even think of it as something that's hard to achieve, you know? Um, or if there's a cultural phenomenon where everyone's going to a certain kind of group that emphasizes a certain thing, then that becomes a more prevalent element in a definition of recovery. So I don't think it's fixed in time. And even this, they try to be specific. Some of the items in the survey are ambiguous, like being honest with myself. You know, not exactly sure what that means. So I don't know. Did you think this was a valid trial, John?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was very kind of interesting kind of thoughts. I think it was pretty encompassing of like the elements I would think of at least. So like I'm not in the recovery community, so I guess I'm not that off base as to what it could be.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was good too. So let's talk results. What did they find? They found four core recovery elements. So things that pretty much everybody agreed on. Um, and those four were: recovery is a process of growth and development, being honest with yourself, taking responsibility for the things you can change, and reacting in a more balanced way. Those are the four core elements of recovery that everyone could agree on. 80% of people overall and in every subgroup put these four in their top 10. There were four other recovery elements that were prevalent, meaning they were in the top 10, but not in every single subgroup. And those were referencing the ability to enjoy life and handle negative feelings without substance use, abstinence or non problematic substance use, living a life that contributes to society, family, or your own betterment, Um, and so again, that means 80% of people in most subgroups put these in the top 10. So just again, one more time, I'm going to repeat these 8 elements of recovery in this survey of 10,000 people. So recovery includes, or recovery is a process of growth or development. So again, it's a process, not a destination. Being honest with myself, taking responsibility for the things one can change, reacting in a more balanced way, being able to enjoy life without substance use, being able to handle negative feelings without substance use, abstinence and or non-problematic substance use, and finally living a life that contributes to society, family, or your own betterment. So John, do you think if we put those 8 things together, that's a good definition of recovery?
Yeah. I think the most interesting part about this, now that I'm looking at this graph in front of me, that the 4 core elements have nothing to do with the substance.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the abstinence item, one of the abstinence items did make it into that top 10. Um,
But they're not the core. Like
no,
the core ones are all kind of like stuff. I'm like, God, I'm like, I kind of wish I could do all of those things
I
on
know,
a
right?
daily basis, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're great. And when you put the whole list together with those top 8, I mean, it would be hard to say that's not really what recovery is. So there was a ton of data on the various subgroups, sociodemographic subgroups, and how the groups were similar and different. So I just pulled out a few fun facts that people might like. The first is that the subgroups were mostly pretty similar, honestly. Items that were in the top overall mostly ranked high in all the subgroups, so they weren't too different. One interesting difference was that people in medication treatment for opioid use disorder, they did not rank being able to enjoy life without drinking or drugs. Um, and they did not rank being abstinent as high as everybody else. They seem to value that less. People who have severe substance use disorder ranked being able to enjoy life and handling negative feelings without drugs and alcohol much higher than people with mild or moderate substance use disorder. And I would sort of agree with that. If your substance use disorder is really severe, it can be hard to enjoy life. It makes it so that life is not fun. So achieving enjoyment without drugs or alcohol is a big goal for a lot of people. And finally, among people who used mutual help groups like 12 Step or Alcoholics Anonymous, they were more likely to rank being honest with myself very highly. It came in as number 2 than those who didn't use mutual help groups. And that's not a big surprise since one of the core tenets of 12 Step is kind of honesty and an honest accounting of yourself. And without that sort of prompting of that core item in recovery from 12 Step, would people have ranked it as highly? I'm not sure. Um, and again, just to note, those ideas of building kind of honesty, accepting responsibility for yourself, and caring for others, like living a life that contributes to others, that's the core of the 12-step program that many participants in this study and many of our patients have done. I don't know, of course, if people are drawn to 12-step because it supports elements of recovery that they desire, or whether the 12-step itself shaped people's definitions of recovery, but this is very much in line with kind of 12-step principles. So, what are the clinical implications of this study? Um, I really feel like the recovery elements identified here, they partially reflect some stakeholder definitions, like some institutional definitions, but they offer greater specificity and include some novel elements of recovery like personal integrity that didn't make it into any of the official quote unquote definitions. And some of the top elements like honesty are not really mentioned in any of the institutional definitions of recovery either. Most people said that some abstinence goals should be part of recovery, but the abstinence elements were not rated super highly. And the elements that people really chose are ones that they kind of point to areas of functioning that are particularly damaged in the addiction process. And supporting those would support an addiction-free life. And so what I'll do is, I'll do my best to address these aspects of recovery in the context of my office visits and also to support the development of our recovery pathways with our CRS staff. You know, I feel like because I work with buprenorphine a lot, I feel like buprenorphine does a really good job of getting people off drugs, but it doesn't like magically hand you your life back. To get your life back, you have to do these other elements of recovery to rebuild your relationships and your career, your finances, your health. That's a process. Um, so yeah, do you think you'll be using these ideas in your office, John?
I feel like it's like anything. I feel like there's like pendulum swinging here. I think, when I started and I kind of followed you here, I think we had kind of more of an absence only approach. Everyone kind of participated with an absence only program here in our community. And then I feel like we've swung to now this kind of risk reduction, harm reduction, kind of just medication at the office visit kind of approach. And I feel like I've found myself swinging back, hopefully somewhere to the middle. I feel like, different people need different things, but certainly kind of if you're not incorporating these elements into your life, or you at least you don't even value them, I guess that's the first thing. Like, what do you value? I just feel like eventually we're going to have a problem at some point. Not me and the person, but I feel like there's going to be some sort of thing that rocks the boat, and it's going to be lend to an outcome that the person doesn't want.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. It's your recovery is more vulnerable if you don't have these other tools. Well, and also like I see some people who don't, they're kind of stuck. Like they've gotten off drugs, but they haven't really achieved other life goals. Um, and I want to help them achieve all their goals. So I really like this. And I was glad to get a chance to use it. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great article, Sonya. Thanks for presenting. So, kind of like looking through here, we do have some talk back from the last episode. Our podcast friend Charlie from the Kratom Society podcast sent us a comment regarding Kratom and his thoughts on buprenorphine dosing, inspired by episode 54 about high dose buprenorphine. Quote, the high dose discussion was interesting. In the quitting Kratom community, there is a big debate about what dosage and length of time on MAT is ideal. Many assert lower doses of Kratom, like 4 to 8 grams, should be used, and only for 2 to 4 weeks. Now, this is a lay people without MDs giving advice on the internet. What I know from the literature is that there seems to be better outcomes for longer-term bupe treatments, like years, not months. Lots of people get into Kratom because they become dependent on Suboxone and had trouble detoxing such horrible withdrawal from bupe. So when they see another segment of the quitting Kratom community going to the bupe to get off Kratom, you get COVID-19 vax like crazy extreme debates. Some interesting thoughts.
Well, right. People going back and forth, Suboxone, Kratom, or buprenorphine, Kratom. We talked a little bit in that episode about how the Kratom effects are kind of like bupe. They're pretty similar. I just like this comment because it reminds me that there's, you know, I have a significant selection bias in which patients I see and who I see being successful. And I try hard to remember that, like, I'm seeing people preferentially who are successful with the service I offer. People who are not going to be successful or who don't want it don't come. I don't have a randomized segment of the population in my office. So I try to remember there's a whole world out there of people in recovery who are doing things different from the way, I'm doing it in my office.
Yeah, there's a selection bias, although, it's not quite like this just one-to-one back and forth, right? I mean, when you go to the pharmacology, right, it also has like a stimulant-like effect. And I feel like I've had a couple patients now where they had an opioid use disorder, and we kind of treated with buprenorphine, and it seems like they've come back to me after using Kratom, and like it seems like it's kind of scratched a scab of a stimulant use disorder or methamphetamine use disorder as well. So I'm like they came back to me with like 2 issues. This has kind of opened up. And now, like I said, that's like an N of 2 or something, but it does seem interesting that wasn't a problem the first go round.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is different. It is a different product. But because it's available, over the counter, everybody's kind of DIYing it. It's a lot more like, I call it being your own pharmacist.
It's not really even over the counter, right? There's no pharmacy. It's just it's over the gas station.
Right. Just buy it by the kilo at Tobacco Hut.
We're going to get a comment on that statement, I think.
Hey man, if Tobacco Hut wants to write in, whoever owns Tobacco Hut, be our guest. Please send us some comments.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Addiction Medicine Journal Club. The best part of any journal club is the conversation, and we want to hear what you have to say. To have your opinions about the articles included in a future episode, send us your comments on social media, email, or join our Facebook group. The links are in the show notes. Original theme music was composed and performed by Benjamin Kennedy, audio editing by Michael Bonanno, CAB support from My Carers, produced by Dr. Patrick Beeman and Ars Longa Media. Addiction Medicine Journal Club is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. The views expressed here are our own and do not necessarily reflect those of our employers or the authors of the articles we review. All patient information has been modified to protect their identities. Thank you for being part of the conversation and have a great day.